say thank you first for that suspiciously brief introduction. I should thank you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades, friends, for coming. I think it was time that you had a guest who has no humor, no tricks, and who, though he knows is blocking the way between you and cocktail hour, is fully aware of it, has no intention of being brief. But who, for all that, is very glad to be back in Las Vegas. I can't be the only one of you to have noticed that I went to the Bellagio this morning for a fast one. Fast what, you asked? Ha! That these palazzos, these pyramids and ziggurats and skyscrapers are not built, are they, by the winners. By what I would describe as a simple process of elimination. We have a rough idea who did build, whose hard-earned money did build these ziggurats and temples and skyscrapers. And actually, I suppose this will, in this, like everything else, is getting nearer to being over. Someone might let me know. No, they're not going to do that. We old troopers don't repine. We play the provincial halls at all hazard. That might be it. I think it would be as true to say that every cathedral, every temple, I'll punctuate, I'll use this for punctuation. Every temple, every cathedral, every mosque, every synagogue is built in roughly the same way. They're all built, like the ziggurats of Las Vegas, on the priesthood who were smart enough to understand which side of this wager to be on, and who could not believe, and who still cannot believe, how many gullible saps there are in the world. So I think we're well met in that sense, and well met in the right place. Let it be the fools who make the wagers and the cynics who take the profit and the difference. It's why I've always found so disgusting the concept of the wager as proposed by Blaise Pascal, often thought of as a serious thinker by serious people, who simply said, since the benefits of belief are so great and the disadvantages of disbelief so obvious, why not simply place your bet on the chance that God exists? Because then if he does, what, so to speak, can you lose? There, it seems to me, is the root not just of amorality, but immorality. Here is why religion is not just false, but actually an inculcation of the wicked, of the immoral way to think, of the selfish as well as the irrational way to think. Is there no one who could say for their God that this supposed deity or creator would prefer someone who, at the close of day, unlike Bertrand Russell, who simply announced that he would come to the pearly gates and say, I can sometimes do his voice, "Oh Lord, you did not give us enough evidence," who would, perhaps a little improving on that from the ethical point of view, who would say, don't you prefer someone who could not bring himself to believe in the propaganda of your priests, but who tried to lead an ethical life in any case? Would that perhaps not be a more winning bet? If it is a more winning bet, a more ethical bet, we can at least be certain that monotheism forbids it. So I frankly prefer the Randy wager every time. Any miracle you can do, we can do better. And you lose, and we keep the money. That's talking, it seems to me. And that's why I feel so honored to be here. I have had a sense all week, a sense that I don't usually inculcate in myself at all, the sense that I am not worthy. Round any corner in this hotel, I might meet Michael Shermer. Again, fortunately for me, this time I have met him before. I might meet Professor Dawkins. I might meet James Randi, I might meet Penn, I might meet Teller. I feel overawed, seriously, deeply overawed by all that, but I'm comforted by an even more refulgent faith than that of hero worship that I don't really profess. Because the great thing about our sodality, our company, ladies and gentlemen, is simply this: we don't need heroes. We don't need a priesthood. We don't need a papacy. We don't need positive reinforcement. We don't need incantations. We don't need weekly ceremonies to drive it all home. We don't need nightmares and dreads and guilt in order to confirm us in what we think. We certainly don't need excommunication or anathema. We belong to a natural community, a community that arises in the ordinary course of events of people who are skeptical, who can come to the same conclusions independently of one another and calmly compare and contrast these conclusions when we're lucky enough to meet. I suppose that not Randi supporters, but Ayn Rand supporters do occasionally have schisms and excommunications, and there's nothing like a good schism among objectivists to teach you how there are pitfalls even in non-religious cultism, but we prepare ourselves, I think, fairly calmly for those too. We don't even need to stress something that will keep us a secret between these walls. We don't even need to stress our moral superiority. That's something we can just keep to ourselves, all right? We hardly ever need to stress our moral superiority. But that's what's meant by our superiority over the sordid calculations of somebody, an overrated sophist like Blaise Pascal. Now, skeptics and unbelievers are unfortunately also doomed to be accused of being joylessness, of being joyless, of promoting joylessness, even a certain frigidity. I don't think anyone who'd been to this meeting would think of the skeptical or agnostic or atheist or rationalist community as a joyless one. To the contrary, I think it's probably a great deal more fun to be here than at, say, Jerry Falwell's Liberty Baptist College Hoedown. But it's an accusation we might spend a minute or two discussing amongst ourselves. After all, is it not true that in Las Vegas, even the losers, freely taken as they are by the clever priesthood who built the temples and the ziggurats here, even those losers do have sort of a good time? My youngest daughter, in fact, was conceived in Caesar's Palace about 12 years ago now, on a losing streak, which I wouldn't have been without. And isn't there consolation to be had, after all, in this veil of tears and misery, in the supernatural? Why should one want to deny people these simple and these humble pleasures? And who, in any case, are we to deny them this kind of happiness? And so I suppose if I had a title for my sermon today, and I've only just cleared my throat, I want to warn you, it would be, does credulity matter? Is credulity a problem? This is often stated, actually most often stated, by a famous misquotation from Karl Marx, who is supposed to have said that religion was merely the opium of the people. Anyone who studied it at all will know that in his introduction to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, Karl Marx says no such thing. He says that religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature and the heart of the heartless world and the spirit of a spiritless situation. And he adds only then the punning remark that it's the opiate of the masses, and goes on to say that criticism of it, of religion, has plucked the flowers from the chains, not so that men and women shall wear the chain without consolation, but so that they may break the chain and cull the living flower. And to appreciate that difference, I think, is to appreciate quite a lot of what I intend to say, and it must be very clear to you now, there are no jokes in this story, unless you include the one about the rabbi and the priest and the mullah who go into a bar in New York, and the barman looks at them and says, "What is this? Some kind of a joke?" I want to argue that it is, in fact, some kind of a joke and also some kind of a fraud. I want to say why I think that credulity and gullibility, however apparently harmless, ought to be resisted, ought to be fought, ought to be combated. First, I think that arises from a natural respect for our fellow creatures, our fellow humans. It isn't pleasant to see people being cheated or robbed or forced into meaningless applause, even when the occasion is apparently a trivial one. It wasn't pleasant when people were told that their unbaptized babies or their babies who died in childbirth were going forever to limbo as a consolation. When the church decided after a long rethink that there was no such place as limbo after all, after hundreds of years, they said, actually there isn't a limbo. I knew many people who said, you can't tell me there's no limbo now. You can't tell me that. I and my child have been living there for decades. Don't you tell me there's no such place now. That's what's evil. That's what's evil about taking the innocent for a ride. Or it's one example among many. Even when people's trustingness is, in other words, is innocuous or innocent, or arises from innocuousness or innocence, harmlessness, it isn't harmless in itself because it can be exploited by people who, so far from being innocuous themselves or innocent themselves, are entirely unscrupulous. Those who can't believe the number of saps who are born every day and who believe that perhaps we could get them to wear a colored shirt and join the party or support the leader or endorse any program or policy or embark on a crusade or a holy war. We have to make it our work to ensure that the average human type is raised to the point of education and culture where he is beyond the reach, or she is beyond the reach of that kind of demagogy, and we don't just do this because we're sorry for the saps. And the exploited, we do it for ourselves. We do it because we know what a terrible threat can be presented when the cynical meet enough members of the innocent to start a movement of their own. Teaching people that thinking for themselves is painful is also painful, but it's worthwhile, and you don't suspect your motives for doing it. It's worthwhile and it's ultimately satisfying. In teaching people to think for themselves and to take the risk of reason and of doing the hard work that's necessary, to return to a point I made earlier, are we robbing them of their fun? Are we cheating them of their happiness? Are we teaching them to live without awe? I'm talking about AWE. I mention that because I don't know how many of you have ever seen John Wayne playing the Roman centurion in The Greatest Story Ever Told. How many would that be? Good. Actually bad. I wish it was fewer, but still. At the moment when the crucifixion is culminating and the heavens open and the veil of the temple is rent in twain, if you recall, and the tombs open and the dead run gibbering through the streets of Jerusalem, and other things that you'd think local historians would have noticed at the time, but did not. At this moment, the rain and wind machine is turned on and it all flies into the face of John Wayne standing with a leather tunic and a spear as a centurion, and he's supposed to say, truly, this was the Son of God. So he did, rain and wind flying at him notwithstanding. But the director cut it, and it was William Wyler, I think, was the director, and said, John, that was great, that was really great. But do you think we could have it with a little more awe? He's a great actor. He said, okay, cue. Do rain again, do wind, and earthquake, and temple veil rent in twain, and lightning. So all that came on, and Wayne really held onto the spear this time and said, oh, truly this was the Son of God. Well, we don't want people to live without awe. We don't want people to just think that they're insects clinging to some doomed rock. Why don't you try it sometime? Why don't you take a look at a page of Stephen Hawking, for example, on the event horizon. Follow the event horizon. The event horizon is the lip of the black hole from which we think escape velocity cannot be achieved by light, but from which we know that much proceeds. If, in theory, and if it ever became possible in practice, you could get to the lip of that black hole, you would have met the event horizon. You'd be on the event horizon. As you fell in, you would, in theory and in practice, be able to see the past and the future. You'd be able to see time, except you wouldn't have enough time quite to realize that this is what you were doing. But one of Hawking's colleagues says that if he ever discovers himself terminally ill, that's how he wants to die. Now, to be able to reflect upon the event horizon, I would submit, ladies and gentlemen, is a great deal more awe-inspiring than a burning bush, shall we say, or a wooden statue that weeps or pees or bleeds. And that there is a great deal more majesty and an inexhaustible source of wonder to be found in the struggle to uncover why it is that we are now so near to knowing not just our origin as a species, but the origins of our universe. And if I turn to the origins of our species, and we look at the miraculous uncovering and unraveling of the strings of DNA that have shown us our kinship and fellowship with other creatures and other species, that have abolished, just by the study of themselves, the whole bogus medieval concepts of racism and tribalism, as well as creationism, have shown them to be unfounded. Can anyone studying this extraordinary story not be a little more impressed than by a talking snake? We don't aim to take people's awe and mystery and wonder away by any means. We have for them real stories. We can break the chain, and we can teach people to cull the living flower at the same time. Now, why is that not just desirable, but also necessary? Gullibility and credulity are unsatisfying. It's like being given a wonderful truffle and throwing it away and chewing on the wrapper instead. And the exploiters and the practitioners of gullibility and credulity know this very well. They know that these pathetic stories and myths and morality tales are not enough. How do I know that so certainly? I know it for this reason. If you or I believed that we had a Redeemer who cared about us, and who cared about us before we were born, and for every heartbeat of our lives, and after we were dead as well, and minded how we were doing, and cared for us and our loved ones, if we believed we'd found a Redeemer who really was this way, wouldn't it make us happy? Shouldn't it make us happy? Should it not make us contented? Should we not feel we'd unlocked the key to the most marvelous secret ever presented? Well, why doesn't it make them happy then? Why can't they be happy till everyone else believes it too? Why do they have to tell me that if you don't believe in this wonderful offer, we have another one for you, that you go to hell and are treated abysmally and forever? Now, in North Korea, the country they most seem to admire, where the concept of paradise is continuous praise of the leader and continuous wonder at the fantastic, the magnificent coexistence between you and him, you can sometimes hope to see his face. He's given you everything. He is what you adore. He's what you worship. You have the right only to praise him for his many gifts. Well, at least from North Korea, you can die and defect. From the other dear leaders, you can't. They'll follow you all the way to hell and gone. So the insecurity that's manifested by the faithful interests me very much. It doesn't seem to content them, and they don't seem to be sure that they're right till they've got everyone else to believe in it too. And the threats that they use are ones of the most hideous moral blackmail and sadomasochism. So again, I think we have to care whether people are credulous or not. Thomas Jefferson, about whom I've just finished a short book. Thomas Jefferson was wrong when he wrote so laconically in his journal, "It doesn't matter to me if my neighbor believes in no gods or in 100 gods. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg." I wish the sage of Monticello was right. Those who believe in the 20 gods will certainly pick your pocket and break your leg, unless or until you believe in one or other of their deities, which is why we have to try, if we can, to confine credulity to the home, at best, something that can be escaped from in real life. Did any of you read yesterday in the New York Times the account from Sri Lanka about tsunami theology? It was worth reading. Everyone on the coast of Sri Lanka thinks they have a cause to attribute or an explanation to offer. In the case of the Muslims of Sri Lanka, they say that it's the very large number of people who have not been following the commandments of Allah. Obviously, this creates earthquakes and waves. In the case of the Christians, it's because there are too many Muslim heretics, and this goes back and forth. But what was interesting to me was that the worst of the lot were the Buddhists. The Buddhists said, of course we knew this would happen, because at Christmas, only just the other day, the Christians were eating meat and drinking alcohol. And if this didn't bring it on, we don't know what does. And furthermore, there was a photograph of this woman pointing to the Buddha heads on her gate, saying, the Lord Buddha was on my gate. He wasn't on the Christian gate down the road or on the Muslim family's gate, and they've all gone, and I'm still here. I mention it because a lot of people think, well, some of these religions are not as bad as the others. They're contemplative, they're Eastern, they're friendly, they're furry. No, they're not. Why don't you try and look at a book called Zen at War, which shows that Japanese imperialism and its military arm used Zen Buddhism as its training manual. The ideal soldier was a Zen spear, a person erect, the mind at rest, the body all ready for action, waiting for orders, contemptuous of the mind, contemptuous of reflection, contemptuous of the intellect, the perfect fascist robot who would die for a god king. Well, people say, well, surely the Dalai Lama is a furry figure. Oh, yeah? He says he's born a god and born a king. And we have to begin with that proposition before we can understand how saffron he is. And who has also published a manual on bedroom strategy and upon what you may do with whom and at what time in the sanctum of your bed. Always a bad sign, that and the dietary regulations, I find. All of these religions are the same. They represent the surrender of the mind, of the only thing that distinguishes us from the roundworms and other creatures who are also in our DNA string, and they try and snuff out and blow out the poor candle of reason, which is the only light that we have. And if it was true that sodomy caused earthquakes, as used to be believed in the ancient Christian days, I spend my summers in San Francisco. I can sort of see what they're talking about, but there hasn't been a really big one since 1906, and I have a feeling that these events are probably not determined by the will of any deity. So it isn't the will of the deity or the priest. You notice that all these are voluntary statements by the believers that I've been quoting. These are not hateful statements made by mullahs or rabbis or priests or other vermin. These are things said by the congregation to New York Times reporters. It is, in other words, not a problem that there are those who wish to command and wish to preach dogma and wish to be obeyed. It is the willingness, it's the willingness of the congregation to be a slave. It's the willingness of the congregation to believe. It's the servile instinct that lurks in every human being that is the one that we have to combat with eloquence and with irony and with conjury, of course, and with tricks and with humor, but also with a certain intransigence, because what they want from us is everything we've got. They want to destroy everything we care about. They want to take everything that we have. I'm almost a quarter of the way through my remarks by now, so please feel free to relax and have a drink and a smoke. No, actually, ladies and gentlemen, I think I can become your hostage soon, a prisoner, and join the panel. I just want to say a couple more things. In my book, I give an account of being summoned by the Vatican to testify against the beatification of Mother Teresa. The woman recently calling herself Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Most people think they know about the Catholic Church that it has a devil's advocate, Advocatus Diaboli. The present Pope actually abolished that office quite recently in order to fast-track beatification and canonization. He's made 5 times more saints in the last 10 years than his 5 predecessors combined and doubled. I think he may think that the faithful need a bit of cheering up. And I think he may be right. A church, after all, that said there's no wiggle room on divorce, no wiggle room on contraception, no wiggle room on remarriage, no wiggle room on priestly celibacy and other fairly trivial sins, has asked for wiggle room on the rape and torture of children, which I think most secularists find repulsive without being told from a holy book. At all events, he had to abolish the office of devil's advocate in order to put Mother Teresa on the fast track. So when my testimony was invited and accepted, I realized that I'd become the first person in history to have represented the devil pro bono. And it would have been just as easy, of course, to write a book saying Pat Robertson sucks, which I hasten to add, to assure you, he does. But there wouldn't have, I think, have been quite as much education in that as trying to show to people that someone who they themselves thought was a heroine was, in fact, a dangerous, crooked, fanatical, nasty fundamentalist. But again, all the work against me was not done by the church, but by the believers, by the rank and file, by the credulous, and that's what taught me the real lesson. I remember when Salman Rushdie, my friend, was hit with a life sentence and a death sentence by the Ayatollah Khomeini just for the action of writing a novel. In other words, the theocratic head of a foreign state announces in public that he will offer money in his own name to suborn the murder of a writer of fiction who isn't an Iranian. A pretty frontal challenge to what we hold dear. A friend of mine suggested to Salman that his sequel should be called Buddha, You Fat Fuck. But I hope I've said enough to show that the irony there would be at the expense of those of you who laughed. Now, this really is my closing paragraph. I once heard Abba Eban, a very brilliant Israeli former foreign minister and ambassador to the United Nations, who some of you may have heard or read yourselves, make a speech in New York where he said about the most pressing foreign policy issue that faces us now, the Israel-Palestine dispute. He said, what strikes you? He said, when you first look at it, and when you second and third time survey it as well, the first thing that will strike your eye about this dispute, he said, is the ease of its solution. You will grant me, I think, not many speeches begin on this topic with that sentence. But it's true when you think about it. There is a fairly small country which contains 2 roughly symmetrical peoples, roughly symmetrical in point of number, and confessional persuasion. And the solution has been obvious since at least the Balfour Declaration. There should be 2 states for 2 peoples in 1 land. It is the common sense of the question. Why does what everybody wants and what everybody knows is reasonable not in fact eventuate? Why does it not happen? Why hasn't it happened? Because there are those who say that God gave the land only to one of those peoples, and they want to occupy it all themselves and bring in all other Jews and exclude all non-Jews, because then the Messiah will come. And they have their counterparts, and those who say, no, 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 you're right essentially, but it was given to another people, actually ours to be exact, and all of yours have to leave or be killed, and then God will be pleased. And it's seconded. There's a sort of coat-holding role played by the creepiest Christians who say, well, if we help the Jews to do this, perhaps it'll bring on our Messiah, though he will, of course, have to kill all the Jews who don't convert before the end of days occurs and the struggle really begins. Well, look, This is the contribution of monotheism to civilization in our day, and right in front of us, and we have a president who believes in all three of these causes. And we're getting to the point where there isn't enough Kool-Aid to go round. And so I discover that I am a traditionalist after all, and that I am with Voltaire. And I think that for all our conjury and humor and irony and wit and forbearance and tolerance and pluralism, we still have to agree with Voltaire and to say, écrasez l'infâme, destroy this dangerous thing before it destroys us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Destroy this dangerous thing before it destroys us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.